Welcome back to the Proverbs series, guys. For today's video specifically, I want to go to chapter 27, verse 6, which reads, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy."
Wow.
Well, look, we just spent time in Proverbs 26:24 examining the enemy who disguises themselves with their lips while harboring deceit in their heart, right? But now, Proverbs 27:6 gives us the counterpart to that portrait, and the contrast it draws, I think, is one of the most counterintuitive observations in all of wisdom literature in the Bible. Right? The enemy's kisses are profuse, the friend's wounds are faithful. In other words, I think this is just reasonable interpretation. The person who's actually working against you might be the one saying the nicest things. The person who actually loves you might be saying the things that hurt. Look, the surface experience of the two relationships is almost exactly opposite to what you would expect based on the emotional texture of each encounter. Right? The kisses feel like love, the wounds feel like attack. But Solomon is saying that feeling is not a reliable guide to what's actually happening. You know, I think this verse sits at the intersection of two themes we have been tracing throughout this series, right? The gap between words and hearts that Proverbs 26:24 described, right? And the costly, honest love that genuine wisdom consistently commends over comfortable flattery. Proverbs 27:6 brings both of these themes to a sharp, practical point and asks us to honestly examine which of the two we are more interested in receiving and which we are more willing to offer. So let's break down the verse here. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. For context, the word faithful is the interpretive key to the entire verse and the detail that most resists the casual reading. In Hebrew, the word is ne'emanim. Don't know if I said that right, but it comes from the root aman, the same root from which we get the word amen. It describes someone that is trustworthy, reliable, confirmed, and true. It is actually one of the strongest words in the Hebrew vocab for dependability and integrity. And I think applying this word to wounds is the move that makes the verse genuinely startling. A wound, by definition, is painful, right? It's an injury. It's an experience that the body and the heart register as damage instead of benefit. And Solomon says the wounds that come from a genuine friend are faithful, trustworthy, and reliable. Not in spite of the fact that they are hurt necessarily, but precisely because they come from a source whose love for us is real enough to say what needs to be said rather than what we need to hear, or what we want to hear. And so the words Solomon is describing, I think, are not cruelty dressed up as concern. They're not the harsh, self-righteous corrections of someone who enjoys pointing out other people's failures, but they are the specific kind of painful honesty that only becomes possible in a relationship where genuine love is already established, where the person delivering the wound has demonstrated through consistent faithfulness that what they are saying comes from care rather than contempt. And so I think this is where the verse requires careful distinction, right? Because the wound of a friend is faithful because three things are simultaneously true about it. It is true, meaning it accurately identifies something real rather than inventing a problem. It is motivated by genuine love for the person receiving it rather than by self-interest or the pleasure of correction. And it is delivered within the context of a relationship where the recipient has reason to trust the source. I mean, remove any of those three elements and what you have is no longer the faithful wound of a friend, right? It's either a harsh criticism from someone who doesn't love you, a well-meaning but inaccurate observation from someone who does not understand the situation, or an honest assessment delivered with such poor relational timing that the relationship cannot even bear the weight of it. Proverbs 17:17 establishes the foundation that makes faithful wounds possible. Right? A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. The love at all times is what gives the wound its faithfulness. The friend who wounds you is doing so from the same love that is present in the easy seasons. Right? The wound is not a departure from the friendship, but it is an expression of it, perhaps the highest expression, the moment when the love is strong enough to do what comfort cannot. So Proverbs 28:23 here reinforces this verse with a direct comparison that echoes our verse. Whoever rebukes a man will afterward find more favor than he who flatters with his tongue. The rebuker finds more favor afterward, right? Not immediately, because the wound stings before it heals, but after the initial pain, the person who received the honest rebuke tends to recognize that the wound came from somewhere real and that a relationship was strong enough to sustain the honesty, becomes stronger rather than weaker for having done so. Even in Galatians 4:16, it gives us one of the most personally revealing statements that Paul makes anywhere in his letters. And I think it connects directly to the experience this verse describes. Have I then become your enemy by telling you the truth? I mean, look, Paul is writing to a community that received his honest correction and began to treat him as an adversary for it. Right? They experienced the faithful wound and misidentified the friend as an enemy. And I think that misidentification is one of the most consistent and most costly mistakes that people make with the honest speech of those who love them. And it is a mistake that Proverbs 27:6 is specifically designed to prevent. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. The second half of the verse delivers the contrast with a precision that should unsettle us, I think. Not scarce are the kisses of an enemy, or occasional are the kisses. Profuse, which means abundant, overflowing. Right? The enemy whose lips disguise their true intentions does not offer only a few insincere compliments. They offer many. And the profusion is part of the strategy, a volume of affirmation designed to create a sense of warmth, approval, and safety that the reality behind the words does not support. We established this dynamic in Proverbs 26:24, right? The enemy who harbors deceit in their heart needs the lips to work overtime, basically, to maintain the gap between the internal reality and the external presentation. Right? The profusion of kisses, I think, is the maintenance cost of the disguise. Right? The more deceit is being concealed, the more verbal affirmation is required to keep it hidden. And I think this is just a specific and recognizable pattern. Right? The person in a relationship, a workplace, or a community whose approval changes, or whose approval always comes easily, who never challenges, who agrees with everything, who offers constant affirmation regardless of whether it is warranted, is not necessarily a loyal friend. Right? They may be exactly what Proverbs 27:6 describes. The profusion of kisses is not evidence of deep affection, but it is actually evidence of either superficiality or of an agenda that the constant affirmation is designed to serve. Even Proverbs 29:5, I think, makes the danger of the profuse kisser explicit. It says, a man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his feet. Right? And so the flattery is not neutral social lubrication, but it is a net. It creates the false security of believing that you are seen, known, and valued when you are actually being positioned for a fall. Right? And so the person caught in a flatterer's net is vulnerable precisely because the profusion of kisses convinced them they were safe. Let's take a look at Judas, right? The most dramatic biblical illustration of this verse, I think. I mean, his betrayal of Jesus in the garden was executed through the specific mechanism of a kiss, the sign of greeting and affection deployed as the signal of delivery to those who meant to destroy him. Matthew 26:48-49 even records it by saying, now the betrayer had given them a sign saying, the one I kiss is the man, seize him. And he came up to Jesus at once and said, greetings, Rabbi, and he kissed him. The kiss was the wound, but it came from the enemy rather than the friend, which is exactly why it was a betrayal rather than a wound of faithfulness. Man, the most painful wounds in human experience are sometimes, but not only sometimes, but often the ones that arrive wrapped in the language and gesture of affection. This makes me sad, bro, because I see myself as a fool that this passage is describing, bro. You guys don't know me in real life, but I'm very non-confrontational. I'm very agreeable. And there have been countless times where I knew I should have told my friend what he should have done, but I just sugarcoated my response, and it makes me ashamed. Right? I can't go back. I can only work on what I can and improve the next time the opportunity presents itself to sharpen iron. To sharpen that freaking iron. Anyways, I want to allow you guys to also, find tangible ways to improve the quality of your own life with this passage. So I want to provide some practical applications. And the first thing, is to relearn how to receive painful honesty from people who love us. Just because I think the most important application of this verse is about how we receive the wounds that real friends deliver. Because I think our instinct when someone says something that hurts us is to protect ourselves, right? To question the motivation, to distance from the relationship that produced the pain, or to even dismiss that was said as unkind or unfair. And all of those responses, don't get me wrong, make emotional sense in the moment, but none of them are wise. Like, Proverbs 27:6 is asking us to develop the capacity to sit with the initial sting of a faithful wound long enough to ask whether it's actually true, whether the person saying it has demonstrated the kind of love that earns the right to say it, and whether the discomfort of receiving it might be worth more to our actual growth than the comfort of the affirmation we would have preferred. And that capacity is not natural. I think it requires the kind of humility we examined in Proverbs 11:2, the settled willingness to be taught rather than to be always comfortable. The second thing is to become genuinely capable of delivering faithful wounds when love requires it. Right? Because the other side of the application is equally demanding. Right? If faithful wounds are the mark of genuine friendship, then becoming a genuine friend requires developing the capacity and the courage to deliver them when necessary. Most of us are far more comfortable in the role of the profuse kisser, offering abundant affirmation that maintains relational warmth without risking anything. The faithful wound requires us, though, to value the actual well-being of the person we love more than we value their immediate approval of us. It requires the relationship to be strong enough to bear the weight of honesty. It requires the timing and the spirit to be right. And it requires us to have done enough honest self-examination that we are not delivering wounds from our own unresolved issues rather than from genuine love. None of those things are easy, I recognize, but they are what genuine friendship looks like when it is operating at its highest level. And the third thing is to evaluate our closest relationships by what they are actually producing in us rather than how they make us feel. I think the most practically discerning application of this whole verse is the evaluation it invites of the relationship we currently call friendships. The relationship that consistently makes us feel affirmed, validated, and comfortable, but never challenges, never corrects, never says the thing that is hard to say is worth examining. Is it the love of a genuine friend or the profuse kisses of someone who is not actually invested in our growth and well-being? And the relationship that occasionally wounds, that sometimes says things that are hard to receive, but has demonstrated over time a consistent pattern of genuine care, is worth protecting even when the wound is fresh. Right? And the emotional experience of the two relationships can be almost exactly opposite to their actual value. Profuse kisses feel better, but faithful wounds produce more. So let me just give a closing thought here, right? Proverbs 27:6 is one of the most important verses in the entire book for anyone who takes friendship seriously. It redefines what genuine love looks like in practice and exposes the counterfeit that masquerades as warmth and affection while actually serving something else entirely. The friend who wounds you is not your enemy. The friend whose kisses are profuse is not your friend. Wisdom knows the difference, and it values the faithful wound over the profuse kiss every time. But it's not because pain is good in itself, but because the love that is willing to wound is the only love strong enough to actually tell you the truth. Let's keep it real, man. That love is rare. So when you find it, protect it, even when it hurts.